thank you all for your patience and understanding. And we're going to get started right away with Chairman Carr, but I do want to acknowledge, if I might, we have Richard Wiley with us, and he's a former FCC chair, and
Chairman Wiley, look, I have not graduated to the point where I can call him Richard Wiley yet, so hopefully I'll reach that point at some point in my career, but for now it is Chairman Wiley. I'm very uncomfortable with anything else.
Well, without going into any further details, Richard Wiley and I are old enough and have known each other longer than you have.
Yeah, I'm getting there.
And he's whipped me in tennis enough that if I want to get back at him, I can call him Dick or Richard whenever I want to. So we're glad he's here. And thank you so much for being here. You and I have done these conversations a number of times. I think we did one when you were general counsel. I know we have done several when you were a commissioner, but now you're chairman, so that's exciting. And it made me think, I stayed up last night really wondering in what capacity you might move up to next when I have when I have the next conversation with you. So everyone here, of course, knows Brendan Carr's background, his bio. I'm not going to repeat it all. I'll just say this. He was confirmed by the Senate unanimously 3 times. That's really an achievement. And then
it'd be tricky to do it a 4th time. That's a bit much. That might be asking too much. 3 might be the most I could do unanimous.
Well, I've noticed you haven't been pulling any punches in order to line yourself up. So anyway, let me just start this way. Give you a couple softballs. You've had these positions at the Commission, General Counsel, and FCC Commissioner, and you've also practiced law with Wiley Ryan for a time. What in those experiences do you think has most prepared you or best prepared you for your chairmanship now?
Yeah, it's funny. So, referring to Chairman Wiley, I think previously there had been just 2 people, is this right? It was a club of 2 that were sort of FCC general counsels and FCC chairs as well, you and Chairman Carr, if I remember that correctly. So I butted my way into that club and added one more person to it. But I've been incredibly lucky in my career. I started out 20 years ago. Chairman Wiley took a risk on me, a young kid out of law school, and gave me an opportunity to join his law firm and learn from the ground floor everything about telecom law. And I was incredibly lucky to start there with the foundation. And then to your point, I've had lots of great opportunities at the FCC. I started as just a line attorney in the Office of General Counsel. I got to be a legal advisor to a commissioner, general counsel. As a commissioner, I've sat basically in every seat on the dais at this point, from wingman, commissioner in the majority, alongside Commissioner O'Reilly, who's here, to commissioner in the minority, holding down the fort from that perspective, and now chairman. And one of the things I've seen, being at the FCC now for over a dozen years, is probably the most precious commodity for a chair. You're right there? Okay. the most precious commodity for a chair is time. Every chair that I've had the chance to talk to on the way out, they said, I wish I'd just done one more thing. I wish I'd gone a little bit more aggressive on this issue area. And so from the get-go, I'm starting from the no regrets perspective. And so we've been roughly 2 months in, and we've been running an extremely aggressive agenda. We're churning out a lot of work. I know there's sort of things that the media pays attention to that we're doing, and we're doing that stuff, but there's also a tremendous amount that we're doing that doesn't get the same headlines. We have really started to accelerate a lot of the FCC's work in the Space Bureau. Jay Schwartz, as the bureau chief there, is doing really great work. We issued a series of decisions last week on copper retirement, which sounds wonky, although I guess this is the audience to talk about wonky things. We're making it easier to sort of shut down old copper lines and then freeing up investment for new high-speed stuff. So we're moving across so many different components of the FCC right now, with the hope being that whenever we're tapped on the shoulder and our time is up, that we don't have regrets, that we don't feel like we should have pushed harder on something, and we're starting from that mindset.
Okay, well, don't be afraid to make any headlines here today. That's perfectly all right. Okay, I want to, before we get down to the nitty-gritty of specific, wonky telecom policies and so forth, I just want to ask you this, and Chairman Andrew Ferguson over at the FTC talked a little bit about it this morning as well, and so, I think I want to get your perspective, Brendan. The status of so-called independent agencies in our government is much in the news these days and has been debated now for many years by scholars, and there's been quite a bit of recent Supreme Court jurisprudence, like the Seala Law case related potentially to the nature of independent agencies. And then President Trump, one of his early executive orders on February 18th, ensuring accountability for all agencies, brought the actions of independent agencies like the FTC and FCC apparently under more purview or greater purview of the executive branch. And so I just want to ask you generally, given the jurisprudence that's developing that I mentioned and the president's executive order and all your experience that you've had, as you go about your job, how do you think about the status of the FCC today in relation to the president and the executive branch?
Yeah. Well, I think this is an area where the Constitution is crystal clear. Article 2, first sentence says that the executive power shall be vested in the president. I think that's a pretty clear statement of where those authorities lie. I've got no doubt about the president's power to remove various government officials. If you look at the Federal Communications Act, for instance, passed in 1934, which was actually 1 year before the infamous Humphreys executor case. The prior case, the bookend on the other side of that, was a case called Myers. And Myers took the position that the president has essentially unfettered ability in carrying out the executive function to fire certain officials. That case was modified by Humphreys executor. But in 1934, when Congress passed the Communications Act, Myers was the law of the land. And so Congress did not think that constitutionally they could impose a limit on the president's removal of FCC commissioners. So the Communications Act, unlike other acts passed afterwards, does not have what we call for-cause removal protection on commissioners. So the president can remove commissioners without cause, at least under the terms of the Communications Act. What I've said is, from day one, I want to understand, as my first thing, 100% President Trump's agenda. It's his administration that he's running. And that's how I've sort of gone about it, is with that understanding. And again, we've taken sort of immediate action across a lot of different areas of the FCC. In terms of Humphreys executor itself and how it plays out, I imagine there'll be court cases coming, and the court will provide some more guidance on that.
Thank you. Okay, this is always somewhat tricky, but I'm going to do it because I know how you always adhere to whatever I ask you to do. Just tell us at the macro level, sort of like a topic sentence level, what your 3, 4, 5 priorities are, and then so I'll have them in mind, and then I want to drill down on some of those questions. But if you could just give us that top level.
Yeah, I've been pretty clear about the type of agenda that I want to run. I guess I'll summarize it maybe in 4 core points. One, we need to reinvigorate the FCC's approach to media regulation. I think you've seen several actions from me on that front. I'm happy to sort of drill down on what that means. 2, I think we need to continue to work to promote free speech and rein in a lot of the excesses of large technology companies. There's some pieces of that the FTC is doing and is going to do. There's pieces of that the DOJ is going to do. But there's also a role, I think, for the FCC there, including in Section 230, which is in the Communications Act itself. And I've been active, whether through letters and other efforts, to work towards what I call smashing the censorship cartel. We just lived through this unprecedented surge in censorship the last couple of years, and I think the FCC has a role there to play. 3, I sort of cluster together a bunch of sort of traditional economic agenda initiatives. So they're, top 3.1, I guess, would be spectrum. Our auction authority lapsed several years ago, and restoring that auction authority, which Chairman Cruz has been doing a phenomenal job leading on, is vital to our national security interests, to our economic growth, to jobs. When we free up spectrum, it enables carriers to bring people across the digital divide. It enables you to bring into new markets fixed wireless competition to cable, to fiber. And the evidence shows that when we get a new fixed wireless provider that comes in, which is enabled by more spectrum, prices decrease. So it's deflationary. It drives down prices for consumers. It's a good thing. So our national security, our economic growth depends on getting more spectrum out there. And sort of going on a long period of time on this one topic. But I think it's important. I think it's one of the most important things that Congress is working on right now, is getting a pipeline of spectrum. Chairman Cruz has been doing great work. I'm sure he talked about it. Chairman Guthrie has been doing really good work on it. But it's something that we have to have because we are at a very, very precarious situation right now. When you look globally at the amount of sort of prime mid-band spectrum that China has, whether it's for 5G or 6G or soon AI, because ultimately AI is a very decisive technology going forward. We want it to work right in our hands, right in our smartphones. Well, if we want AI to work in this country, if we are going to truly be the gold standard technology, which we are right now, but if we're going to continue that, we have to have the spectrum capacity to make that AI work right on your smartphone. And China has a many-fold advantage on us right now when it comes to mid-band spectrum. So we have to close that gap. And the work that Chairman Cruz is doing is important. The space economy is also a piece of that third bucket. We've been working on that. Permitting reform is part of that. We've got some ideas we want to run there. And then fourth, stepping back, would be national security. We have a lot of issues there that we're working on as well. We stood up a new council on national security. We announced last week the first major initiative that council has been working on, which is, a lot of you are probably familiar. We got Huawei, ZTE, China Mobile, China Telecom. These are all carriers that the FCC revoked certain authorizations from the commission that they'd gotten in many cases dozens of years ago, or denied them authority to interconnect to our networks. Well, it turns out that some or all of those entities are still doing business in this country, maybe under a theory in their view that they can do it without needing the FCC authorization that was denied or revoked, but we're going to get to the bottom of that. And if they're interconnecting with businesses that do have authorities, that could be another hook for us to look at taking action, but we want to close any loopholes there. So from the media issues to big tech to sort of a strong economic agenda, which again includes the deregulation effort that we're doing, to national security, we're sort of running it through that construct.
Hey, Brendan, you were doing great on that topic sentence outline when you got started. And that's great. That gives us a framework to really dig further. So let me just pick up on spectrum and then we'll go down some other issues. Senator Cruz, you mentioned as a piece of legislation the House does. Just tell us in terms of what, because I know that's in Congress, but what type of legislation would you like to see emerge from the Hill, and are you optimistic about that?
Yeah, I feel really good about it. I mean, look, I think what Chairman Cruz is doing with this pipeline of spectrum for the commission is the right approach. And frankly, we've been in this situation before. If you step back to where we were in 2017, when 5G was just emerging, once again, back then, China had outpaced us on available spectrum for 5G. We were behind the 8 ball. A lot of people were saying that we were going to lose the race to 5G to China. President Trump stepped up. He pushed hard to free up more spectrum. The White House led on this. The FCC under Chairman Pai freed up a tremendous amount of spectrum. We flipped the script. We ended up freeing up more spectrum than China did. We leapfrogged our global competitors. In a lot of ways, past this prologue, we're in the same position where, in my view, over the last 4 years, we really fell into a deep malaise when it came to freeing up spectrum. And so I think we have the opportunity now to rerun the same 2017 playbook. We're going to get 6 gigahertz of licensed spectrum. That's not the target right now, but we do need to get off of 0 megahertz of midband. In the bill and the framework that Chairman Cruz has been working on is key. And simply, it has to get done, because if we continue in this situation where China has this massive advantage compared to us with this spectrum that's available for high-speed midband spectrum, the consequences that would flow from us from an economic perspective, from a national security perspective, are unacceptable. So we've got to right that ship.
So disputes are ramping up over unlicensed spectrum versus licensed spectrum. That seems to be coming to the fore more now, or shared spectrum versus exclusive licensed spectrum. You have to deal with these issues when you get down to the nitty-gritty, I understand, of specific bands and their differences. But can you just talk generally about how you think about those differences, licensed versus unlicensed, or shared versus exclusive, to the extent you have views on that?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, we got to have a little bit of everything, and we need the right balance. And my concern right now is that we are just drastically out of balance. I mean, you can count mid-band spectrum different ways. You can count spectrum towards shared or high-powered in different ways. But just as a matter of sort of rough approximation, I think it's safe to say that we've got something like, of the mid-band spectrum, maybe 65% of it is available to federal users, either shared or exclusive. On the unlicensed side, I think we have somewhere roughly, give or take 5%, 25% or so available for either unlicensed or for shared on the commercial side. And we only have a very small percent, relatively, roughly around 7%, if my memory is correct, in terms of spectrum that's available exclusively for high power use. And that's not the right balance. And so when you look at where do you need to go next to free up more spectrum, I don't go towards unlicensed spectrum, I don't go towards shared spectrum because of the amount of work that's been done. Where we really need to plug the hole is with that high-speed spectrum, and that's whether it's, again, 5G, 6G, or again, I think AI is going to be really the main driver. When you look at the hockey stick of demand that we've had for spectrum over the years as data has increased, you put AI on top of that, that hockey stick goes, even steeper. So that 7% number is not the right place for the country.
Okay, I want to turn to the BEAD program, the broadband deployment program, and maybe relate that also to universal service reform as well. But you've been critical of the Biden administration's implementation of the BEAD program.
Was I? I really didn't feel like I talked about it that much over the years.
Yeah.
This is
By the way,
news to me. I'm just hearing for the first time.
We have as well. As you know, at the Free State Foundation, we've been critical. We figured we were in good company with you. But you were the first, I think, at least the first that I'm aware of, to really call attention to the fact that not one shovel had been put in the ground or one.
I remember a tweet or two on that. Yeah, coming back to me.
I don't know anyone else that said that first. So now we're. And that obviously was disappointing so long after the money was appropriated. But we are where we are, and give us your views on what should be done to fix that. I understand Congress has a role in NTIA, and Ariel Roth hopefully will be over at NTIA shortly. But you, of course, are such an important part of it, and the FCC's got its own responsibilities with USF. So just talk about where we are and what you would like to see done to get broadband deployed in the remaining areas, the few remaining areas that don't have it, and what we need to do in that regard.
Well, first of all, I think Ariel is going to do a phenomenal job when she gets over there at NTIA. She's obviously an old FCC hand, significant experience on Senate Commerce Committee. This is going to be one of the things, obviously, that she's tasked with dealing with, I imagine, similar to Spectrum. And so I think, having Ariel over there is going to be a really good thing for the country and sort of helping our economy. So I'm excited about that. And obviously, yes, we're hearing later this week, and hope that she moves through very, very quickly. I guess the good news on BEAD is that it's sort of a Commerce Department program at this point, and so my role with respect to sort of talking a lot about that, I think naturally has receded. What I said before was a couple of things. One, I thought that the way that the Biden administration was running it was contrary to the statute. The statute said take a tech-neutral approach, and I think the Biden Commerce Department put just too much of a thumb on the scale for fiber. We love fiber. We want fiber in lots of places. Maybe it should be the lion's share of connections in certain programs. But basically, almost 100% was where the Biden administration was heading. And I think that's a mistake. And actually, I don't like fiber, because if you're saying that, what you're really saying is that those families that are stuck on the wrong side of the digital divide should just wait for years longer than necessary to be receiving high-speed service. So I think that was a mistake. But I defer entirely to the Commerce Department and where they end up landing on that. I mean, the other issue that I focused on is there was a lot of extraneous political goals that have been sort of inserted in there, promoting DEI, climate change agenda, price controls that I think just made it very difficult for providers to participate in the program. So I think get rid of all that stuff, but then otherwise, obviously, I sort of defer to where Secretary Lutnick goes on this one.
Okay, well, the Universal Service Program, on the other hand, is a program that the FCC does have obviously a central role in implementing, and reforming the existing program has been a hot topic since shortly before Genesis, or maybe before that. So to a significant extent, it seems to me, Chairman Carr, that consideration of USF reform, which we talk about with those air quotes, at least as to the funding on the broadband deployment side, can't be entirely divorced from consideration of the proposed expenditure of the massive BEAD subsidies and there are some other broadband subsidy programs as well. And then, of course, tomorrow, we have the Supreme Court's argument in the Consumers Research case, and the issue there, to put a point on it, is whether the universal service regime is constitutional or not under the non-delegation doctrine. So, I'm going to put a couple questions to you. I'd love to hear your predictions. I know what the FCC's position is.
I'm with the USG position in that case. No news to break there.
But if you want to make a prediction about the outcome, we'd like to hear it. But putting that aside, assuming just for the sake of argument now that the program is held to be unconstitutional, it seems to me then we're sort of back at the drawing boards in terms of, there's an opportunity to go back to the drawing boards to refashion whatever universal service regime would be appropriate at that point. So I'd love to hear your views on what you think that should look like, how it should be funded. Should it be funded by direct appropriations? I know in the past you've talked about the possibility of having contributions come from so-called big tech companies as one source of funding. All these things presumably are going to might need to be addressed conceivably sooner rather than later because of the Supreme Court's decision. So talk to us about universal service, and to the extent it's relevant, how that relates to the other subsidies we were talking about before.
Well, my own experience with universal service goes back to actually my very first day on the job in 2005 at Wiley. I was an associate. Someone had asked me to track some of the changes in the USF contribution factor over the last year or two, and I remember this very vividly, that the contribution factor had gone from 5.5 to 5.75 to 6%, and people were saying this is really on an unsustainable track. Flash forward today, and now we're way in excess of 30%, and so I just think that is an unsustainable trajectory. I mean, we've talked about how traditional telephone revenues, accessible revenues are in a decline, and yet the demands haven't stopped. We've got $9 billion a year. I do think it's time to step back and ask some fundamental questions. GAO had a report a couple years ago that talked about how there's, I don't have the number in front of me, something like 120 different broadband spending programs spread across dozens of different agencies. As connectivity has become more important, a lot of committees in Congress focus on it and get broadband funding programs to the agencies that they regulate. And I'm not sure we're in a good spot in terms of just how disaggregated all this broadband spending is. I think we need to have a first principles discussion about how do we go forward. There's the $42 billion that's mostly still sitting there for BEAD. We got $9 billion here. We've got USDA money. I mean, there's just money all over the place. I do think we need to have a better conversation about what's going forward because technology has changed too, right? Now you've got Starlink that's out there. You've got, hopefully, knock on wood, Kuiper that's going to get up and running here sooner, get some satellites up there, introducing more connectivity, more competition You've got, all these new developments in fixed wireless. You've got direct-to-cell technology. So in light of the technology options that we have today, how would you build this system if you were starting over? I think that's a conversation that, as the FCC, we should be having, and hopefully we will have. I don't know, the outcome yet. I think if you are going to sort of keep the program, and there's, fundamental questions about that, I do think that looking to the different corporations that benefit from those expenditures and asking them to contribute a fair share is an idea that I've pushed before. I think it still makes a lot of sense, but I think these are all sort of the threshold fundamental questions that we should, potentially look at the FCC.
Okay, now earlier when you were giving us your top level priorities, you mentioned the censorship issue, and you've talked a lot about that, and you're concerned that there's been too much censorship, excessive censorship, not just by the government or by the government, but by private entities, including big tech. And shortly after the election, you posted on X, quote, "We must dismantle the censorship cartel and restore free speech rights for everyday Americans." And already this morning, Brendan, we've talked quite a bit about free speech, and we've had Jonathan Turley talk about his new book, The Indispensable Right, meaning free speech. And as you know, I've been concerned about excessive censorship as well for many years, both by the government and private entities. But I want to ask you several different questions. And it's appropriate, I guess, that we're here in the National Press Club talking about free speech. So 230, you mentioned 230 yourself, and the question, I guess, is just what you think your authority could be under 230 to achieve what you would like to achieve to address censorship. At the Free State Foundation, by the way, we've actually written several times that we think there's the authority, you have the authority to offer your opinion about the interpretation of 230. But beyond that, if there is a beyond that, how do you intend to use 230 to address this concern you have?
Well, look, I do think Free State and you have done really great scholarship over the years on Section 230. I mean, it wasn't that long ago where Section 230 was not as hot a topic as it was over the last couple of years. My own view is I agree with the view that was expressed by the FCC's general counsel, Tom Johnson, when he worked for Chairman Pai. He put out a legal blog that walks through very clearly that Section 230, people like to say Section 230 of the Communications and Decency Act. I always get a little bit of a cringe. It's actually Section 230 of the Communications Act. It's actually a different section of the CDA. I don't know how, this is one of those like myths that just took off. But anyways, because it's in the Communications Act, it's very clear. If you look at Supreme Court cases, if you look at various provisions of Title II, the FCC has authority to interpret the provisions of Section 230. And what I have long been of the view of is you basically can, from the FCC's perspective, you can leave Section 230C1 alone. That's the provision, in my view, that says if you put someone else's speech up on your platform, you're not liable for it if it happens to be libelous or tortious in any way. The problems, I think, have come in Section 230C2, where courts have read immunities into that provision that Congress never codified in the law. And I think it would be appropriate for the FCC to step in and clarify those provisions of 230C2 in a way that is, again, going to promote more speech, less censorship. But obviously, the FCC is not going to be alone in pursuing this general work stream. I think the DOJ is going to have important work to do. I think the Federal Trade Commission is going to have important work to do. I think it's incumbent on all of us to marshal our authorities and work towards promoting free speech, diversity of opinion.
Okay, another area that where arguably the questions of censorship arise, and I know you've addressed some of this, but let's explore it. It has to do with how the Commission exercises its authority under the public interest standard when mergers or transactions are before you. You have to decide whether those are in the public interest in order to approve those. And you've said that that you'll consider as part of that public interest review potentially questions relating to whether there, on the one hand, say there's been news distortion by one of the applicants, or some other questions relating to content of their program. And you know, over the years, I've taken the view that I'm not too anxious to see the public interest authority of the commission expanded, because I think in the past it's been abused sometimes that way. But talk to us about how you see using the public interest standard specifically related to program content issues, or even specific programs that somehow might be considered inconsistent with the public interest, and whether you're concerned about, in doing that, having the way we think about the reviews under the public interest standard being somehow ratcheted up, conceivably further than they should be, or possibly even in a way that runs up against First Amendment concerns.
I think when you step back and look at the sweep of different types of speakers that are out there, there's different frameworks that apply. So if you're a person on a soapbox, have at it, carte blanche. If you're sort of an end user on a social media site, I think as a participant in the digital town square, you should have a lot of freedom. And frankly, I think that the corporations should not be censoring and deciding what you can say and what you can't say. When it comes to broadcasters, though, they're in a slightly different category from a regulatory framework perspective than the person on the soapbox or the participant in the digital town square. And they have access to a valuable, scarce public resource, the airwaves. They're licensed to use it. Originally, at least, broadcasters got that spectrum for free. I understand, they always remind me they paid a lot for it in secondary transactions, okay? But they got it originally from the government for free. And there is an obligation that comes from that. And the obligation is that you operate in the public interest. And in my own view, over the last several years or decades, the FCC has walked away from enforcing that public interest obligation. And I think we need to reinvigorate that. If there's broadcasters out there that aren't interested in living up to public interest obligations, then the FCC's address is 45 L Street Northeast. You can send us your license and we will find a way to put it to higher and more valued use. But that's the bargain. You got access to scarce resources originally for free, and that comes with it obligations that don't apply to a person on the soapbox or a person in the digital town square. And when you step back more broadly with respect to media, my own view is I think about it from two perspectives. On the one hand, you look around and sort of trust in mainstream media is absolutely rock bottom. It's just completely bottoming out. For years, the national mainstream media could say, look, at least we are more trusted than Congress. Well, they can't even do that anymore, right? They've now fallen behind Congress if you look at the latest Pew survey. But trust in media is not sort of uniform. There's something else going on. So that's the national news media. But look at your local news media, your local journalists, your local reporters. Trust there is significantly higher. And so when we talk about this distrust in the media, I think it's important to separate in people's mind sort of the national programmers, the national legacy media, from the actual local reporters. And so I want to separate that in people's mind. And I want to make sure that we support the actual local broadcast stations to the extent that they are actually meeting and looking to meet their public interest obligations, including serving the needs of their local community. So I want to empower them to serve their communities. And there's lots of ways in which the national programmers, I think principally ABC, CBS, and NBC, over the years are sort of interfering with the ability of the licensed local broadcast stations to do what they want to do. You can see it in the context of affiliate agreements, where increasingly, all the money is getting sucked up to the national programmers, where more and more decision-making power effectively seems to be made by the national programmers. And I think that we need to, constrain that sort of outsized growth of power that the national programmers have had over the last couple of years and re-empower the local broadcast stations. I mean, at some point, you have so much control being exerted by ABC, CBS, and NBC on local stations, you have to wonder whether it's so much control that it's effectively attributable interest for ownership reasons. And you look at, a recent incident in, I believe it was Miami, where a station, I believe it was an ABC station, was trying to renew their affiliate agreement, and ultimately they couldn't get it done, and they got dropped. A very popular ABC station in Miami. So I'm very concerned about the accumulation of power that we've seen in ABC, CBS, and NBC. And I do think there's a lot that the FCC can do to sort of re-empower those local broadcasters to, give the Heisman to the national programmers and to, really refocus on their core public interest obligation of serving their local community's needs.
Well, I appreciate that response. We could, for each one of these things we've talked about, we could go on a lot longer, and that's why we'll do it again and continue. But I've just got two more areas I want to cover before we wrap up. And one, we'll just put it under the headline, delete, delete, delete. I think Rick Simmerman referred to that earlier. By the way, I love that caption. When you, when you've been doing this as long as I have, and maybe Dick for 40, 50 years. Have you ever seen a caption, delete, 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 as opposed to separations or accounting standards, under section whatever?
Yeah. Well, there was some debate inside the chairman's office on this. I said from the get-go that I wanted it to be titled In Re Delete, Delete, Delete. And the team said, well, you mean like thematically you want people to take that away? I'm like, no, like literally just write delete, delete, delete. And it took a little while, but finally I prevailed and we got that to be the docket.
Yeah, well, that's one that everyone will remember for sure. So I'm going to ask you questions about the delete proceeding. And, the notice says, I'm just going to quote right at the beginning, the agency seeks comment on every rule, regulation, and guidance document that the FCC should eliminate for the purposes of alleviating unnecessary regulatory burdens, close quote. So let me put out a couple questions, and you just take them as you will. Has your staff already identified, or are they beginning to identify on their own rules to delete? Because I guess one reason this is important, if you happen to want to adopt a new rule, I'm not sure you have one in mind that you want to adopt, but if you do under President Trump's order, then you've got to delete 10. So you need to have some stocked up, I guess.
Yeah. Put some deletes in the bank.
Yeah, you got to get deletes in the bank. So two other related questions. Some of the rules, a lot of the people in this room, I'm sure are going to, take the opportunity to submit a lot of paper in this proceeding, and some of the things that will come in, some of the ideas will be things that Congress needs to do. Are you guys going to help formulate some recommendations for Congress as a result of what you get, which I'm sure would be helpful? And then secondly, related to this, can you describe the role that DOGE might play in this effort, has already played at the commission, whether they're have already been involved with the commission or not, because I'm sure there's some interest in that as well.
Yeah, we, as we talked about, we branded it delete, delete, delete. I think a lot of the lawyers in the room are calling it billables, billables, billables as they're viewing this FCC proceeding. But to your point, we already do have an internal DOGE team that is working. We are already underway assessing rules, regulations, subparts of rules that we can delete. We are already, banking, at least in my own view, a number, dozens and dozens of regulations that we are prepared to wipe off the books. And so I think we're already in a good shape there, but obviously there's going to be a tremendous work stream that is going to go through this, because we're going to look, at every rule, at every regulation. We've got stuff working across all the bureaus at this point. We're going to be working with the actual official DOGE group as well as we go through all of these issues. And if we end up with areas where there's some sort of regulatory asymmetry and we can't solve it because of a statutory reason, then we'll welcome the chance to work with Congress on this. But I think this is going to be a very significant effort. And to your point, we're not, waiting to complete it before we start to bank deletes. We should be doing that very soon here.
Okay, and finally, I just want to ask you about an area that you mentioned, Brendan, at the outset as one of the priorities, and that's national security. That's important to me, and I assume all of us here, and hopefully all of us in this room.
If not, get out of here.
But, sometimes I think some people forget that right in Section 1, right at the top of the Communications Act, it says one of the purposes for which the FCC was created is, quote, for the purpose of the national defense. It's sometimes in the past hadn't been talked about very much, but it's important. You created this new Council for the National Security. Just tell us briefly why you did that and what you hope to accomplish with it.
If you step back over the last couple of years, I would view this council as more of a continuation of really the good bipartisan work that Chairman Pai did, that Chairwoman Rosenworcel did on this area. But it used to be that almost all of the FCC's work that would fall under the national security rubric could be dealt with by the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. But now so much of our work cuts across bureaus. Just look at OET, for instance. We have the Secure Equipment Act, where we prohibit equipment authorizations for particular entities or particular devices and models. And so the FCC's work on national security is no longer siloed in one place. We wanted to put together sort of a cross-agency, cross-bureau work group with a national security advisor, so it's a direct report to me as a specific national security advisor, to make sure that we're collaborating across all these different groups. And I think it's going to be very important. As I indicated earlier, we had our first big initiative there, issuing a number of letters of inquiry and at least one subpoena. There's a lot of other workflows that we're doing. There's more work ahead for the FCC, for instance, on Secure Equipment Act. We have a proceeding right now that's still open on bad labs that we started during the prior administration, and ultimately we'll get that one across the finish line as well. And so I do think this is going to be a really productive portion of the FCC's work, and thankfully we're plugged in with the National Security Council, with other sort of experts across government on national security. I think it's going to be a really good initiative.
Okay, so I'm going to reserve any other questions on the promise that you're going to come back, of course, whenever I ask you to. But I
always enjoy it.
I started out asking about your previous experiences, and how they relate to how you think about your chairmanship, how they prepared you. But what I already understand, I think everyone in this room understands, all of your experience, Chairman Carr, in those various roles really has prepared you for the job you now have in front of you, and the task you're going to confront. Whether anyone agrees on all of the positions you've taken or the things you've said today, I don't think anyone here will disagree the knowledge that you bring to the job, the experience you bring to the job, and the dedication as well that you bring to the job. And I think we are grateful for that. I know I'm grateful for that. And wish you the best, and thank you for being here today.
Thanks, appreciate it.
Thanks so much.